The hum of the engines was steady, a low vibration that seemed to soothe most of the passengers on the long-haul international flight. Naomi Carter, a poised black woman in her early 40s, sat in her first-class seat with her tablet resting on the tray table. To the outside eye, she looked like any other successful professional, elegantly dressed in a navy suit, her natural curls perfectly styled, her eyes calm and observant. What no one on that plane realized was that Naomi wasn't just successful, she was one of the most powerful women in the global aviation industry, the co-founder and majority owner of Skylink Airlines, the very company operating the flight. She had chosen to fly unannounced, quietly slipping into the passenger experience to see for herself how her crews handled long-haul service. But from the moment she stepped onto the aircraft, she noticed the subtle shift in tone when the lead flight attendant, a sharp-eyed woman with a too-perfect smile, had glanced at her. Naomi was used to it, the half-second flicker of judgment some people carried when they saw her skin color paired with her quiet confidence. It wasn't new, but it still stung. She brushed it aside, determined to relax, and leaned back as the service began. Hours into the flight, when the attendants came through with meals and drinks, Naomi politely asked for sparkling water. The flight attendant's smile faltered, her lips twisting almost imperceptibly. Instead of sparkling water, she returned with a plastic cup of orange juice, setting it down with exaggerated precision. Naomi looked up, calmly correcting, "I asked for sparkling water, please." The attendant didn't bother hiding her disdain. "Oh, I'm sure you'll be fine with this," she replied curtly, before tipping the cup just enough for juice to spill over the rim and splash onto Naomi's lap. A few gasps came from nearby passengers. Naomi froze, feeling the cold juice soak into her tailored pants, the sticky citrus scent filling her space. For a second, silence hung in the air, broken only by the flight attendant's falsely sweet voice. "Accidents happen." Naomi's jaw tightened. She knew this wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, a petty attempt at humiliation. She could have called her out on the spot, raised her voice, demanded the purser. But instead, she dabbed at her clothes with the napkin she was handed, her eyes never leaving the woman's face. "Indeed," Naomi said softly, her voice steady with an authority that carried farther than she intended. "Accidents do happen, but consequences always follow." The attendant smirked, dismissing her words, and moved on to the next row, convinced she'd put Naomi in her place. What she didn't know, and what she was about to learn in the most shocking way possible, was that the woman she had just disrespected wasn't merely another passenger. She was the boss of every person on that plane, the one signing their checks, the woman who held their entire careers in her hands. And before this flight touched the ground, Naomi was going to make sure no one on that crew ever forgot who she was. The hum of the aircraft engines filled the cabin as passengers settled into their seats, the occasional shuffle of bags, and the click of seatbelts fastening breaking the rhythm. Naomi sat quietly in first class, her posture poised, yet relaxed, the kind of composure that came only from years of navigating boardrooms where she was often the only black woman in the room. She had chosen this flight not for luxury, but out of necessity. It was the fastest route back to New York, where a major acquisition deal awaited her signature. Every detail mattered in her world. Yet, on this flight, she intended nothing more than to rest, review her notes, and sip on a quiet drink. But peace, it seemed, wasn't on the manifest. The lead flight attendant, a tall woman with a stiff smile that never touched her eyes, moved through the aisle with the kind of authority that was less about service and more about control. From the moment she spotted Naomi, there was a flicker of disdain, subtle but sharp, the kind that Naomi had seen countless times. A glance that sized her up, judged her appearance, and drew its own conclusions. At first, Naomi ignored it, too focused on her work to be bothered by microaggressions. But when the flight attendant leaned across her row with exaggerated politeness for other passengers while offering Naomi only a curt nod and clipped words, the tension became undeniable. Still, Naomi kept her calm, responding with warmth that was met only with frost. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Naomi had politely asked for sparkling water, a simple request. Instead, the attendant returned minutes later with a half-empty glass of orange juice. slammed onto her tray without so much as a word. When Naomi gently reminded her of her order, the attendant rolled her eyes and, in a gesture so shocking it froze nearby passengers, tilted the glass just enough to spill the juice across Naomi's designer blouse. The cold liquid spread instantly, staining the fabric and drawing a collective gasp from those watching. For a split second, the flight seemed to stand still. Naomi sat motionless, not out of helplessness but restraint, her sharp gaze locked on the woman who had just humiliated her in front of the entire cabin. Whispers rippled through the seats, some passengers looking uncomfortable, others pretending not to notice, as if silence could shield them from accountability. The attendant, however, smirked faintly as though daring Naomi to cause a scene. Naomi's chest rose with a deep breath, and though her blouse was ruined, her composure remained intact. She reached calmly for a napkin, dabbed the juice from her collar, and gave the attendant a long, measured look, a look that carried weight far beyond what anyone else could see. Inside, Naomi wasn't humiliated. She was calculating. She had endured such behavior before. But this time, the circumstances were different. This wasn't just a stranger's rudeness. This was happening on a flight operated by an airline she held more power over than anyone here realized. For the flight attendant, it was a petty act meant to belittle a passenger. For Naomi, it was the beginning of a reckoning. Her silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. She wouldn't shout, argue, or demand. She would wait, because sometimes the most devastating answers aren't given in the moment. They're delivered when the world least expects it. The flight's atmosphere had shifted like a storm cloud drifting in. Conversations had dulled to murmurs, and every clink of a glass or shuffle of a passenger's shoe seemed louder than it should. Jasmine sat quietly, her back straight, her eyes scanning the cabin with a calm yet sharp awareness. Her assistant, Leah, shifted uncomfortably beside her, sensing the tension. Passengers who had initially watched the juice incident with a smirk or indifference were now whispering behind their hands, throwing quick glances at Jasmine as though realizing they might have made a grave misjudgment. One businessman in a tailored suit leaned toward his colleague and muttered, "I think she's someone important. Look at how the crew froze." His colleague nodded silently, eyes wide. Meanwhile, the flight attendants huddled near the galley, their voices lowered but panic-lacing every syllable. The one who had poured juice on Jasmine was pale now, her arrogance melting into fear. She rubbed her hands together nervously, whispering, "She said she owns the airline, she can't possibly mean it, right?" Another attendant shook her head sharply. "No, I think she does. Did you see how the supervisor's face went white? I've never seen him like that." They glanced back toward Jasmine, who sat serene, unaffected, almost regal in her composure. The uniformed supervisor himself lingered near the curtain, torn between protocol and the awareness that he was dealing with someone far above his authority. Passengers began pulling out their phones discreetly, pretending to check messages, but instead recording snippets of Jasmine's presence. A couple of younger travelers whispered about her name, searching it online. Within minutes, whispers spread row by row. "She's Jasmine Cole, the tech billionaire's wife." The name carried weight. People's eyes widened as they scrolled through articles, Forbes covers, and headlines about the empire Jasmine herself co-owned. Suddenly, the juice on her blouse wasn't just a stain, it was a symbol of humiliation against one of the most powerful women in the industry. The ripple of recognition moved through the cabin until even the pilot, alerted by a frantic attendant, leaned out of the cockpit door, his eyes locking on her with a dawning realization. Jasmine, for her part, remained calm but deliberate. She reached into her handbag, retrieved a silk scarf, and gently wiped the juice from her hand before folding it neatly. Every motion spoke of discipline and control. Her eyes flicked toward the attendants once, just once, but it was enough to make them retreat, their faces flushed with shame. Leah leaned closer and whispered, "They finally know who you are." Jasmine gave a faint smile. "It's not about who I am, Leah. It's about how they treated me when they thought I was no one." Her voice was low but firm, carrying an edge that reminded Leah why Jasmine was feared and admired in equal measure. By now, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Some passengers tried to strike up polite conversations with Jasmine, hoping to align themselves with her. Others sat frozen, terrified they'd been seen smirking earlier. The attendants whispered among themselves about whether they should apologize again, but none dared approach. Jasmine's silence was more punishing than any outburst could have been. It was a silence that promised consequences, and as the plane cut smoothly through the night sky, every soul on board knew this flight would end very differently than it had begun. The real reckoning had only just started, and Jasmine hadn't even spoken a word in retaliation yet. The silence that followed Naomi's reveal felt heavier than any turbulence the plane could have experienced. The flight attendant's smirk had vanished completely, replaced by an ashen face that betrayed the realization of just how far she had overstepped. The cabin, moments ago buzzing with whispers, had gone utterly quiet, every passenger now leaning in as though they were witnesses to a reckoning. Naomi didn't raise her voice, nor did she need to. Her composure, her poise, and the simple fact that she had just stated she owned the airline sent waves of disbelief crashing down the aisle. A man in the business class section let out an audible gasp, muttering to his seatmate, "Did she just say she owns the airline?" The murmurs returned, now tinged with awe, suspicion, and curiosity. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, his tone cautious, almost trembling. "Ms. Naomi Carter, if that is indeed you, please accept my deepest apologies. We were unaware of your presence on board." The weight of her last name was unmistakable, and within seconds the pilots, crew, and passengers understood that this was not just a wealthy woman, but the Carter, the billionaire mogul whose airline empire spanned continents. The crew scrambled like ants whose hill had been kicked over. Another attendant, clearly the senior, rushed forward with trembling hands, bowing her head and begging Naomi for forgiveness. But Naomi remained seated, her eyes fixed on the original flight attendant who had poured juice on her. "It's easy to serve people with a smile. When you think they matter," Naomi said slowly, her words deliberate, each syllable like a hammer striking steel. "But the real measure of your character is how you treat those you believe can do nothing for you." The attendant's lips quivered, her eyes wet, but Naomi didn't look away. "Today you showed the world your true self. And unfortunately for you, so did I." Passengers clapped softly at first, then louder, the applause rolling through the cabin like a storm. The attendant turned red, shrinking beneath the collective judgment of everyone around her. Naomi finally stood, her presence commanding the aisle like a queen surveying her court. From this moment forward, she declared, "This flight is no longer about embarrassment, it's about accountability. And I assure you, accountability is coming." Her words, sharp and resonant, left no doubt that this was not just a warning, but a promise. For the first time, the crew realized they weren't dealing with a passenger at all. They were dealing with the very woman who controlled their careers, their contracts, and the future of the airline itself. The next morning, the incident with the flight attendant was on every news outlet, spreading like wildfire across social media. Headlines screamed about discrimination in first class, passengers' shaky cell phone videos went viral, and hashtags began trending worldwide within hours. While many were outraged on her behalf, some voices tried to downplay what had happened, accusing her of overreacting. But Maya didn't bother engaging. She had always believed in action over arguments. At her penthouse office later that day, she called a private meeting with the airline's board of directors. The executives shuffled nervously around the glass table, unsure of what to expect. They had all seen the footage, they all knew who she was, and most importantly, they all knew how much power she wielded in the aviation industry. Calmly, she replayed the video of the attendant pouring juice on her in front of them, the silence so heavy that not even the hum of the city outside could cut through. "This isn't about me," Maya said firmly, her eyes scanning the room. "It's about every passenger who gets treated differently because of their skin, their accent, or their status. This airline is supposed to represent excellence, but it's failing, and I won't allow my company's name to be associated with failure. The directors exchanged uneasy glances, already realizing what was coming. Maya then announced that she had exercised her right as majority shareholder to restructure leadership effective immediately. The CEO and senior management, who had fostered a culture of complacency, were out. She appointed a new, diverse executive team, people she trusted to reflect her values and restore dignity to the skies. And with one stroke of her pen, the airline was officially under her full control. As reporters clamored outside the building, Maya finally stepped up to the podium and delivered a statement that resonated far beyond aviation. No passenger should ever be treated as less than human. No employee should ever believe cruelty is acceptable. This airline will not just fly people, it will uplift them. And let this be a reminder: respect is the only class we should all belong to. The crowd erupted in cheers, the cameras flashed wildly, and at that moment, Maya transformed from a wronged passenger into a symbol of accountability and strength. The flight attendant's petty act had sparked something far greater, a movement that would forever reshape the airline industry. The transformation of the airline under Maya's leadership did not happen quietly, it sent shockwaves through the entire aviation industry. Rivals scrambled in boardrooms, governments issued statements, and consumer watchdogs praised the bold changes she had implemented overnight. But for Maya, this was never about headlines or power. It was about sending a message that no one, regardless of their background, should ever be humiliated for daring to sit in a seat they rightfully paid for. Within days, the first wave of reforms began. All staff underwent rigorous retraining, focused not just on service protocols, but on empathy, diversity, and cultural sensitivity. Old hierarchies were dismantled, and Maya personally signed off on a policy ensuring every passenger, whether in economy or first class, was treated with dignity. At the press conference launching these reforms, reporters asked if she had considered selling her stake in the company after the scandal. Maya's answer was simple, yet devastatingly powerful. Why would I abandon something broken when I have the power to fix it? That single line echoed across news stations and became a rallying cry for reform in industries far beyond aviation. Yet, behind the scenes, resistance brewed. Some board members she had ousted attempted to smear her name, leaking false stories to tabloids, suggesting she had staged the incident for publicity. Others tried to stir unrest among employees, whispering that her expectations were impossible. But Maya had been underestimated all her life, and she knew how to fight battles both in the open and in the shadows. With precision, she launched internal investigations that revealed a web of corruption buried deep in the company's old management, fraudulent expense accounts, misuse of safety funds, and discriminatory hiring practices that had kept countless qualified individuals out of positions they deserved. Each revelation was released to the public with undeniable evidence, dismantling her opponent's credibility piece by piece. Employees who had once been skeptical now rallied behind her, grateful for a leader who demanded accountability from the top down instead of scapegoating those at the bottom. Passengers, too, noticed the difference. Flights ran smoother, complaints dropped dramatically, and customer satisfaction soared to record highs. Meanwhile, the very attendant who had sparked the scandal watched from the sidelines, suspended and facing termination, her name whispered in shame instead of authority. Maya never gloated publicly about her downfall. Instead, she focused on building something greater, letting results speak louder than revenge. But privately, she reflected on how one moment of disrespect had set off a chain reaction powerful enough to dismantle an empire of arrogance. The world had taken notice. Leaders from banking, tech, and hospitality industries began reaching out, asking Maya to share her model for reform. What began as one humiliating encounter on a flight had turned into a global conversation about respect, equality, and leadership. And through it all, Maya remained calm, steady, and unshaken. She knew storms would come again. But she also knew this: the higher they tried to build walls around her, the louder her wings would roar when she tore them down. The news spread faster than turbulence across the skies. Amelia Carter, wasn't just a passenger humiliated with spilled juice, she was the sole owner of Skylux Airlines, the company that prided itself on luxury and prestige. By the time the plane landed, half the world had already seen the trending videos and articles. The crew shuffled nervously at the arrival gate, their confidence shattered, while the manager of the crew tried desperately to make excuses, mumbling about misunderstandings and procedural errors. But Amelia didn't need to raise her voice or throw tantrums. She walked off the plane with the same grace she had boarded with. Her presence a silent storm that carried more weight than any confrontation could. Every camera, every passenger's eyes followed her, realizing they had just witnessed the collapse of arrogance in real time. Later that evening, Amelia held a press conference in her understated but commanding style. She didn't lash out at the flight attendant or even mention her by name. Instead, she spoke about dignity, accountability, and leadership, reminding the world that true power isn't in humiliating others, but in lifting them up. Her final words, "Respect is the true currency of the skies," echoed across news outlets, boardrooms, and even political halls. The airline's stock soared, not because of financial maneuvers, but because the world admired her integrity. For the staff involved, there were consequences, mandatory retraining, demotions, and, in some cases, dismissals. But for Amelia, the ordeal was more than a personal vindication. It was a message etched into aviation history. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same crew who thought she was just another passenger had unknowingly tested the patience of the woman who owned every seat, every jet, and every runway under the airline's banner. From that day forward, no one at Skylux dared forget her lesson. And passengers worldwide knew that if Amelia Carter's name was behind the airline, then fairness, respect, and excellence would always be part of the flight.